This is Money Made Simple, the financial podcast that keeps it simple and gets to the point.
Kia ora and welcome back to Money Made Simple, brought to you by Simplicity. So this year is flying by already. It's March already. Isn't that crazy?
It's my birthday month.
Ooh, birthday month. Well, that's that's probably the most exciting thing about it.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
So in the last episode that we did, you chatted with a lovely guy called Colin McGee.
Yes, our very first guest on the podcast.
I really enjoyed that session because I feel like something like this stock exchange, you kind of feel like you should know about it and how it started. But it was really interesting learning about the history, where it began and how it's evolved over time.
Yeah, I feel like it's, as Colin said, it's not nearly as complex as people make it out to be. And it's cool to kind of get just a little bit of a breakdown of what it actually means, and it's how it's just basically owning, a little part of a company.
Yeah.
And looking forward to you talking to him in a few weeks, right?
Yes.
Anyway, let's get on to today's episode. So we are going back to the basics. We're going to focus on choosing the right KiwiSaver provider. And we've actually decided to split this episode into two because once we recorded it, it was far too long for what we're about. We like to keep it to the point. So let's just caveat this. We are in no way going to be doing kind of a hard sell on Simplicity. We just want to kind of think about and get you thinking about some of the key things that you should consider when you're choosing your first KiwiSaver provider or switching KiwiSaver providers.
Yeah, because, it's a really important decision. It's one of the longer term relationships potentially that you're going to have in your life.
And of course, it's very personal, right?
It's definitely something that's going to be different for everybody. But those key considerations that we're going to go through today, that's a great place to start in terms of making a decision.
Absolutely. And obviously, we love talking about KiwiSaver, right?
We love it.
One of our favourites. But for many Kiwis, especially if you're a little bit younger than us, or if you're Jennie, right? Your KiwiSaver plan might not really kind of come up as a day-to-day thought or consideration.
It's more exciting things to do generally. Liv.
Exactly. So it might be a bit of an abstract concept if you're a bit younger, kind of like that untouchable pot of gold at the end of the long, long, long rainbow. Might not even be on your agenda.
Yeah, it could be something that feels really distant and not that relevant to your everyday life.
Exactly. And I guess also with the ridiculous cost of living right now, it's probably not something that is exactly a priority, right?
Yeah, because the thing that's different about KiwiSaver, and we're going to talk about this in terms of the cost of KiwiSaver, but you're not going to see those savings in your everyday life. You are going to see those savings in 10, 20,
Ages
30
away.
years' time.
Yeah.
But the sooner you make the decision, the more of an impact it will have. So, yeah.
So, when it comes to things like your KiwiSaver, it's kind of worth taking just a moment in time to make sure that you're on the right fund or funds for you and with the right provider.
I think if you're about to start working or you're thinking about choosing a different provider, then this is definitely the episode for you. We're here to help.
You're in luck.
Like we said, this is no hard sell. We are talking generally about the things to think about when you want to make a big decision like this. Yep. And spoiler alert, if you're already in KiwiSaver, switching is actually really easy. It can be done in a matter of minutes if you have a few bits of information with you, like your IRD details and things. But it isn't a big deal. No. But the important bit is this bit. It's choosing the right provider.
Yeah. And of course, the right fund and making sure that they have the right fund for you.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So, let's get started. I think we should start with the jargon because, the financial industry, like many other industries, loves a bit of jargon. So let's kind of just break down the basics. We've gone over this in our KiwiSaver episode, but we're kind of good to have a bit of a refresher. So a KiwiSaver provider, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, it's also sometimes called a KiwiSaver manager, just to be
Every
just
term
to
in our industry basically has multiple terms, as we talked about in stock exchanges.
So they are an organisation that offers a registered KiwiSaver scheme. So they are responsible for managing your retirement savings.
Yeah, and you can't just become a KiwiSaver manager or provider, right? So there's kind of a process that you have to go through to become one.
There absolutely is. Yeah. Like it's not an easy process either. So you have to sign a trademark agreement with the IRD. You have to get a managed investment scheme manager license.
Oh, it's a big mouthful, which is issued by the FMA, right?
Yep. So it's not something that any old company or person can do. These providers are licensed and regulated.
And how many of us are there?
There's about 30 KiwiSaver providers, but there are more schemes. I think there's about 38
So that's because some of them have more than one scheme, right?
Yeah, there's a couple of providers that have multiple schemes, yeah.
And there didn't used to be nearly this many. To be fair, there's quite a lot of new ones that have come up, say, over the last 5 to 10 years, including Simplicity, us. It used to be quite limited back in, 2007, when the scheme was starting to roll out.
At that point, it would have only been kind of the big banks and maybe some of the big insurance
and investment fund managers.
Yeah.
So it's proliferated over the last decade.
It really had, which is great for Kiwis because that means that there's a way broader range of choices.
And more competition. So we have to work harder for our members.
Yeah.
Cool. So when you first enroll, you choose your provider, unless you don't choose, and then the IRD allocates you one by default. Some employers have a preferred provider, so if new employees don't choose it when they become a member, then when they're enrolled, they just automatically get allocated into their employer's preferred provider.
Yes. And if you've been automatically enrolled but don't want to be a KiwiSaver member, I think we've mentioned this in previous episodes, you can opt out by contacting the IRD between the end of week 2 and week 8.
So a couple of months.
So yeah, you have the option to opt out. But of course, we would say don't do that.
No, it's that whole long-term savings that you're working towards. Okay, so we really quickly mentioned the word default provider.
Yeah, so that's a KiwiSaver provider that's been appointed by the government. Mm-hmm. They are one of 6 KiwiSaver providers that the government has selected to be that default option if you haven't selected one for yourself. Yeah. Cool. There was a review at the end of 2021. Right. And Simplicity was named one of the default providers as part of that review, which is great. Cool. And based on the government requirements, all the default funds are what we call balanced funds in terms of the risk profile.
Yeah, cool. And we've actually gone over this in quite a lot of detail back in episode, 15, I think it was?
Yeah, the fund types. Yeah.
Next piece of jargon, scheme or plan. So KiwiSaver scheme or KiwiSaver plan.
Yeah, I have no idea why they thought it was a good idea to have 2 options.
There's always 2 plus options.
Anyway, I think a useful way to think about a KiwiSaver scheme or KiwiSaver plan is that it's the overarching legal and administrative structure of the various KiwiSaver funds that a provider has.
Right. Okay, so you become a member of the provider's scheme, so the Simplicity KiwiSaver scheme, for example, but you invest in a particular fund or funds, if you can choose multiple, within their scheme.
Yes.
Yep.
And the fund that you invest in might change over time. So you might start in, so we're talking about Simplicity, the Simplicity Balance Fund, and at another point you might move into the Simplicity Growth Fund.
And then maybe closer to retirement you might move back into the balanced or into
potentially.
Yep.
But you're still in the same scheme or plan.
Cool.
You've just changed funds.
Got it. Okay. Yep. Another one that you might not hear as often, the offer.
Yeah, it's more technical jargon. You'll hear the financy people, not us, using the word offer. And that is essentially within a scheme, they are making an offer, and the offer is the selection of investment options that you can choose from.
And the offer is made up of a range of information and documentation, from who's involved to what investment options are available. But if you just want to simplify it, it's kind of like their portfolio of funds. And so commonly with KiwiSaver, the offer is made up of a number of funds labelled stuff like conservative fund, balance fund, or growth fund. And you can see all these important details about the offer from that provider in a document that you'll often see on advertisements called the product disclosure statement. Okay, investment strategy.
Yes, so your investment strategy is how you choose to invest.
Right.
So that basically includes stuff like whether you're choosing a manager that's passive or active, what the risk profile of your chosen fund is. So talking about defensive versus high growth funds have very different risk profiles. Mm-hmm. And some providers allow you to choose to invest across multiple funds. So you may put a proportion of your investment into higher risk and some into a lower risk fund. So that's your investment strategy. Cool. You're making those choices.
But then the fund's investment strategy.
So the fund also has its own investment strategy, which relates to what it's trying to achieve for all investors of that fund. Cool. So that's the fund objective, the asset allocation, what type of investor it suits. Yeah.
Cool. And finally, switching. What does this mean and why would you do it?
When it comes to KiwiSaver, there are 2 possible switches that you can make.
Right.
The first is what we're talking about today, which is switching between providers. So, for example, I personally switched from AMP Default Fund to Simplicity a few years ago.
Cool. I also have done a couple of switches in my time. I'm not a serial switcher, but I was put back in the old days into Tower, I think, who doesn't actually provide one anymore.
Yep.
Then I switched to Juno once I realised that it was a thing that you could do and good switch. And then I feel like I saw the light and switched to Simplicity because I think we're the best. Personal opinion, obviously.
Yes,
Absolutely
obviously.
not the opinion of the company.
And so that's one switch. The other kind of switch is where you're staying with the same provider, but you're switching funds. So say
As
from
we
a
talked about
yes, from a
before.
balance to
Yeah.
a high growth, for example.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Okay, so that's kind of like the boring stuff covered. Oh, I mean, I find it interesting, but you can, if you see Jenny's face, it is the boring stuff. So
But if you understand the words and you understand the terms, and then it makes everything else much easier to...
Exactly, to get your head around, right? So let's discuss the key things to consider with choosing a KiwiSaver provider and why you might want to switch between providers, given that this choice is personal and it's completely yours to make.
Yeah, okay. So we've sort of narrowed it down to 4 key considerations.
From our perspective,
perspective.
Yeah.
That this is not an exhaustive list.
No,
there may be
anyway.
other things that you want to think about, but this is a great place to start.
Cool.
So the first question we want you to ask yourself is what matters to you and your investments?
Yeah. So, I mean, KiwiSaver is usually or generally a long-term investment. Obviously, the funds can be used for a first home withdrawal or hardship withdrawal, but generally speaking, it's a long-term investment. So it's good to consider kind of a couple of long-term things. So number one, would you prefer a passive or active strategy that your KiwiSaver manager or provider employs? So we've done just a couple of episodes ago, we did a passive versus active one. So great to kind of listen back to that if you haven't already. We won't go on about it here. That can have impacts on both performance and costs over the long term. Another thing in terms of what matters to you and your investments is how much flexibility you want versus kind of like a full-on set and forget. So there's quite a lot of different providers that have quite different offerings, right?
Yeah, so I mean, you can go from one end where you've got sort of full flexibility to build your own KiwiSaver fund, through to some funds that may let you split your KiwiSaver savings over 2 funds. So you might pick a balanced fund and a high growth fund. So
Or like I think Kernel does like a US 500 and whatever else they offer. Yep.
Through to the providers where you may just pick one fund, us for example, but you know those funds are still highly diversified. So you may only have picked one fund, but you could have thousands of investments within that fund.
Yeah, I mean, you're in that way, you're kind of leaving it to the experts to decide on the investment mix rather than deciding you know better in terms of the best, I guess, mix of stuff for your goals.
Yeah. So there's providers the whole way along that spectrum, and you have to decide whether sort of that control and flexibility is important to you or whether you want to leave it to the experts.
And just another note, you can actually, I mean, with providers like us who offer a kind of one horse show, you can still change funds within the provider as often as you like.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
If you choose that provider, that doesn't mean you're stuck in the one fund.
So there's
scheme.
always that flexibility
exactly.
built into the overall KiwiSaver scheme.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
And then there's other considerations in terms of what matters to you and how your money is invested. For example, you may be thinking about sustainability issues or the environment or human rights. So you might want to make sure that your funds are being invested in a way that you consider ethical and you feel
you deal with.
Yeah,
right?
you feel good about.
Yeah.
There's another thing around because a lot of the banks are Australian owned. For some people, it's really important that the company they're investing with is Kiwi owned and operated. So
important to us.
Yes, and there is quite a few options in KiwiSaver for Kiwi owned.
Yeah.
And then also whether the company is doing much investing in New Zealand.
Right.
So
Yes.
a lot of our
from being Kiwi owned.
exactly here at Simplicity. We have lots of global shares in our diversified funds, but we do have New Zealand shares as well, and some of our private equity investments are focused on New Zealand.
Growing the economy and all of that. Yeah, good stuff.
So any one of those things or all of those things might be important to you, or you may have other things that are personally important. So that's part of the what matters to you and your investments question.
Number 2, not really a question, but around communication. So are there great communications from your provider, and is transparency important to you, right?
Yeah. So for me, a couple of years ago, getting a letter from my KiwiSaver provider or an email would not have elicited any interest whatsoever.
Excitement.
But these days I'm a little bit more interested. But the way your provider communicates with you is really important. Do they have a website with some great information? Do they send you a monthly newsletter with updates or info? What level of transparency do they have around the type of things that your funds are invested in? Where is all the performance information? All of these things, they may not always be super interesting, but it is important to have access to that information.
Yes. And to their team, like, I mean, how do you reach their team? Can you just send a quick message, or do you prefer to be able to call them?
Yes, absolutely. So I was talking kind of about the mass communications, but that's absolutely right. Is the team accessible to you if you need them? How quickly do they deal with any concerns that you have or any questions that you have? If you want access to financial advice, and that's not something that we do here at Simplicity, but some of the providers do, is this something that you would like your provider to have?
And just, I guess, remembering that advisors within an organisation are going to have their, I guess, agenda in terms of, you know, they're going to be promoting and advising on their products, not anyone else's. They're not independent.
If you want general financial advice, you're better off going elsewhere for that. But if you actually just want to talk to someone within your scheme,
which fund from their
exactly, you're
offerings.
thinking about changing funds, then you'd be able to get some good advice.
Cool, awesome. So we're going to stop there just because we've basically run out of time for this episode. As you know, we like to keep it short and sweet.
We sure do.
But we are releasing part 2 of this kind of little fund provider episode, or 2-part episode, so you can go straight on to that if and when you like.
We'll be covering reasons 3 and 4 of the sort of things to think about when you're choosing a provider. So we hope to see you soon.
Bye.
See ya.
This podcast contains personal opinions and is intended to provide educational information only. It doesn't relate to your particular financial situation or goals and is not financial advice or recommendations. Simplicity New Zealand Limited is the issuer of the Simplicity KiwiSaver scheme and investment funds. For product disclosure statements, please visit Simplicity's website, simplicity.kiwi.